The plane sat on the tarmac, engines humming with that low, steady growl that always seems louder inside the cabin than out. Outside, the late afternoon sun glinted off the wing, casting long shadows across the runway. Inside, passengers shuffled into their seats, stowing bags, adjusting headrests, and slipping into that quiet bubble of travel mode. Headphones in, eyes half closed, minds already halfway to wherever they were headed. Near the front of the aircraft, in the wide, cushioned comfort of first class, a man settled into his seat with a quiet sigh. He wasn't flashy about it. No designer luggage, no loud phone call announcing his arrival. Just a worn leather satchel, a well-used paperback tucked into the side pocket, and the kind of calm that comes from someone who's earned a little peace. This trip wasn't for work. It was a reward. After months of long nights, missed dinners, and pushing through problems no one else wanted to touch, he'd finally wrapped up a big project. His boss had insisted he take real time off. So he booked the ticket, splurged on the upgrade, and told himself it was okay to enjoy it. He leaned back, fingers tracing the armrest's smooth edge, and let himself breathe. For the first time in weeks, there was nowhere else he needed to be. No emails pinging, no deadlines looming, just the gentle thrum of the plane and the promise of home. Then the cabin door closed with a soft thud, and the final passengers began boarding. At first, he didn't notice her. But then a ripple moved through the cabin, a slight shift in the air, a murmur from the flight attendants near the galley. He glanced up. A woman stood in the aisle, one hand resting on the curve of her belly, the other gripping a small carry-on like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She looked exhausted, not just tired, deeply bone-weary exhausted. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed, and she kept swallowing like she was fighting nausea. She wore a loose dress, but even so, it was clear she was far along in her pregnancy. Maybe 8 months, maybe more. One of the flight attendants approached her gently, speaking in low tones. The man caught snippets, but overbooked. Economy was full. We tried to move you up, but... The woman nodded, but her shoulders slumped. She took a shaky breath and started walking toward the back of the plane. Each step slow and careful, like every movement cost her something. He watched her go. And something in him tightened. He knew that look. Not from being pregnant, of course, but from seeing people pushed past their limit. From watching his own sister waddle through her last trimester, barely able to tie her shoes, yet still showing up for work because bills didn't care about swollen ankles. He remembered how she'd cried once just because someone held a door for her. Not out of sadness, out of relief. Because kindness, when you're stretched thin, feels like oxygen. Without really thinking, he unbuckled his seatbelt. He stood, grabbed his satchel, and walked forward. The flight attendants noticed immediately. One of them stepped toward him, eyebrows raised in polite confusion. "Sir, is everything all right?" He nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine." He kept walking until he was near the woman, who had just reached her cramped economy seat and was trying to lower herself into it without wincing. "Excuse me," he said, voice low and calm. She looked up, startled. "I'm in first class," he said simply, "but I'd be more comfortable back here. If you'd like, you can take my seat." For a second, she just stared at him like she wasn't sure she'd heard right. Then her eyes filled with tears, fast, sudden, the kind that come when your body's been holding it together for too long. "Oh, I can't," she stammered. "That's so generous, but please," he said, offering a small smile. "Honestly, I don't mind. I've been sitting at a desk for weeks. A little less legroom won't kill me." The flight attendant, who'd been hovering nearby, stepped in. "Ma'am, if the gentleman is offering and you're feeling unwell, it's completely allowed." The woman looked between them, then down at her belly as if asking for permission. Finally, she nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. "Really? Thank you." He helped her gather her things, just a small bag and a water bottle, and walked her up to the front. He showed her where the seat controls were, pointed out the extra blanket in the overhead bin, and made sure she was settled before turning to go. "Wait," she said softly. "What's your name?" He hesitated. "Doesn't matter," he said. "Just get some rest." And with that, he turned and walked back to economy. Finding his new seat wasn't hard. It was right where they'd assigned him originally, near the rear galley, sandwiched between a snoring man and a teenager blasting music through leaky earbuds. The space felt tight immediately. His knees bumped the seat in front. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. But he didn't sigh. Didn't complain. He just sat down, pulled out his book, and opened it to a random page. Inside, though, something warm flickered. Not pride, never that, but a quiet satisfaction. The kind you feel when you've done something that aligns with who you want to be, even if no one sees it. Up in first class, the woman leaned her head back and closed her eyes. For the first time in days, she felt safe. Her body relaxed into the plush seat, and the constant pressure in her lower back eased just a little. She thought about the stranger who'd given up his comfort without a second thought. In a world that often felt cold and transactional, his act felt like a reminder. People are still good. Sometimes they're quietly, beautifully good. Meanwhile, a few rows behind, the man read his book, but his mind wasn't on the words. He was thinking about home, about his mom's cooking, his dog's excited bark, the way his neighborhood smelled after rain. He thought about how small moments like this one, unplanned, uncelebrated, were the threads that held everything together. You didn't need a spotlight to do the right thing. You just needed to notice when someone needed a hand. The plane taxied down the runway, picked up speed, and lifted into the sky. Outside, clouds rolled by like soft hills. Inside, passengers adjusted their seats, ordered drinks, drifted into sleep. Life went on, as it always does, but something had shifted, not in a dramatic, movie-style way. No orchestral swell, no slow-motion shots. Just a quiet exchange between two strangers, one giving space, the other receiving grace. And in that simple act, a tiny spark of humanity passed from one person to another, unnoticed by most, but deeply felt by those involved. Hours later, as dinner was served, the flight attendant brought the man a first-class meal, on real china, with a cloth napkin, compliments of the passenger in 1A, she said with a knowing smile. He looked up, surprised. She didn't have to do that, she insisted, the attendant replied. Said you gave her more than a seat. You gave her peace. He accepted the tray, touched but silent. He ate slowly, savoring the flavors, but more than that, savoring the feeling that sometimes the smallest choices can echo in ways you never expect. When the plane finally began its descent, lights dimmed and the cabin grew quiet again. The woman up front slept soundly, one hand resting protectively on her belly. The man in the back watched the city lights appear below, twinkling like scattered stars. He thought about the baby that would soon be born, about the world it would enter, full of noise and chaos, but also full of moments like this one. He didn't know what would come next. He didn't know that this simple gesture would ripple outward in ways he couldn't imagine. All he knew was that he'd done what felt right. And sometimes that's enough. The wheels touched down with a gentle thud. Passengers stirred, seatbelts clicked open, and the usual post-flight shuffle began. He waited patiently, letting others go first. When he finally stood, his legs were stiff, his back a little sore, but his heart felt light. As he walked down the jetway, he spotted her ahead, moving slowly but steadily, a hand on her lower back, a small smile on her face. She turned, saw him, and paused. "Thank you again," she said, her voice stronger now. "You have no idea how much that meant." He nodded. "Take care of yourself and that little one." "I will," she said, "and I'll tell them about you someday." He smiled but didn't reply. Because he knew the truth. It wasn't about being remembered. It was about making someone's burden a little lighter. Even for just a few hours, they went their separate ways, into the terminal, into the night, into lives that would continue unfolding in their own directions. But for one flight at 35,000 feet, two strangers had shared something rare: trust, kindness, and the quiet understanding that we're all just trying to get through this life as gently as we can. And sometimes, all it takes is giving up a seat to remind someone and yourself that goodness still exists. Not in grand speeches or viral videos, but in the everyday choices we make when no one's watching. The airport buzzed around him as he headed toward baggage claim, the hum of voices and rolling suitcases filling the air. He felt tired, yes, but also strangely renewed. Because in a world that often shouts, the quiet acts of care are the ones that speak the loudest, and this was only the beginning. 2 weeks had passed since the flight, and life had settled back into its usual rhythm. The man was back at his desk, coffee in hand, lines of code scrolling across his screen. The memory of the flight, the hum of the engines, the soft glow of the cabin lights, the quiet exchange with the pregnant woman, had already begun to fade into the background of his mind, tucked away like a well-worn photograph in a drawer. He hadn't expected anything to come of it. He'd done what felt right in the moment, and that was enough. But for the woman, the memory hadn't faded at all. She'd arrived home safely, her body grateful for the rest that first-class seat had given her. That night, as she lay in her own bed, sheets clean, pillows soft, the familiar creak of the house around her, she kept replaying the moment he'd offered his seat. Not just the gesture itself, but the way he'd done it. No fanfare, no hesitation, no expectation of thanks. Just a quiet, "Here, you need this more than I do." It stayed with her because she wasn't just any passenger. She was a filmmaker, one who'd spent the last year working on a deeply personal project. After losing her younger brother to a sudden illness, she'd begun documenting small, everyday acts of kindness. Not the kind that made headlines, but the ones that happened in grocery store lines, on crowded buses, in hospital waiting rooms, moments where one person chose compassion over convenience, often without realizing they'd changed someone's day. She called the project The Quiet Kind. And so far, it had been slow going. People were skeptical. Who wants to watch strangers being nice? A producer had asked her during a pitch meeting. Where's the conflict? The drama? But she believed there was power in gentleness, especially now when the world felt so loud and divided. She'd filmed a teacher staying late to help a struggling student, a teenager giving his jacket to a shivering homeless man, a stranger paying for a single mom's groceries when her card declined. Each clip was short, under 2 minutes, but each one carried weight. And then came the flight. She'd been filming discreetly the whole time, not out of nosiness, but habit. Her phone was always ready, tucked in her bag, lens covered unless she had permission. On the plane, she'd captured only what she was allowed. The empty seat beside her in economy, the overhead bins, the clouds outside the window. But when the man offered his seat, something in her stirred. She didn't film him directly. She'd never do that without consent. But she recorded the moment from her perspective. Shaky hands, the sound of her own breath, the flight attendant's voice saying, "He insisted." Later, in her editing suite, a small room in her home filled with storyboards, coffee mugs, and framed photos of her brother, she replayed that audio over and over. There was something in the man's voice, calm, certain, no performance, no pause for applause, just humanity. She wanted to include it in her film, but how? She didn't know his name, didn't even have a clear shot of his face, and she refused to exploit his kindness by turning him into a faceless hero without his knowledge. So she wrote him a note on the plane, just a few lines on airline stationery. "Your kindness gave me hope today." "Thank you." She asked a flight attendant to pass it back. She hoped it would reach him. She didn't expect a reply. She just needed him to know his act mattered. Back home, she wrestled with the ethics of it all. Was it fair to tell this story if she couldn't show his face? Could she convey the weight of what happened without identifying him? She thought about blurring his features if she ever found a photo, or using a voice actor to recreate the moment. But it never felt right. The power was in the realness, the fact that this wasn't staged, wasn't scripted. Then one evening, while scrolling through news about the tech company he worked for, she'd remembered the logo on his laptop sleeve. She saw a press release. A team had just launched a major software update. There was a group photo, and there he was, standing slightly off to the side, arms crossed, smiling just a little. Not the center of attention, but clearly part of something important. Her heart jumped. She zoomed in. It was him. Same calm eyes, same quiet presence. She didn't post the photo, didn't tag him, didn't reach out publicly. Instead, she spent days crafting a short film around that moment, using only what she had. Her own shaky footage of the cabin, the audio of the exchange, voiceover narration, and blurred recreations shot with an actor whose back was always to the camera. She focused not on him as an individual, but on what his action represented, the idea that kindness doesn't need an audience to be real. She titled it, "The Seat He Gave Away." When she uploaded it to her channel, she didn't expect much. Maybe a few hundred views, maybe some quiet shares among friends. But within hours, something unexpected happened. People saw themselves in the story. Comments poured in. "My husband did something like this last year. No one noticed, but I'll never forget it. I was that pregnant woman once. A stranger gave me their umbrella in the rain. I still think about it. Why do we assume people only do good things for attention? This reminded me to trust people more. The video spread, not through algorithms, but through word of mouth. Teachers showed it in class. Pastors mentioned it in sermons. Grandparents sent it to their grandchildren with a note, "Be this kind of person." Still, she never named him. She protected his privacy fiercely. In interviews, she said only, "He's an ordinary man who did an ordinary good thing." And that's exactly why it matters. But online, people started digging. Someone recognized the airline, the flight number mentioned in the description, the company logo. Within a day, his identity was circulating in comment sections and forums. At first, it was respectful. "That's him. He works in cybersecurity." But soon the tone shifted. "Is this staged?" He probably knew she was filming. Classic virtue signaling. Bet he's posting this on LinkedIn right now. The man, meanwhile, had no idea any of this was happening. He only found out when a coworker slid into his office. Phone in hand. "Dude, is this you?" He frowned. "What are you talking about?" The coworker played the video. As he watched, his stomach tightened, not because he was angry, though a flicker of discomfort rose, but because it felt strange to see his private moment turned into public content. He hadn't agreed to this. He hadn't wanted this. "It's not me," he said quickly, though they both knew it was. But the damage was done. By lunchtime, his inbox was flooded. Some messages were kind. "You restored my faith in people." Others were suspicious. "How much did they pay you to do that?" A few were outright hostile. "Save your fake charity for someone who cares." He didn't respond to any of them. He shut his laptop, walked to the break room, and stood by the window watching rain slide down the glass. He felt exposed. Not celebrated, exposed. Like he'd been turned into a symbol without his consent. And now people were arguing over what he really meant. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking, all I did was give up a seat. Why did that become a debate? Why did people assume the worst? And why did it feel like, as a black man, his kindness was always viewed through a lens of doubt? As if generosity from someone who looked like him had to be a performance, a strategy, a cover for something else. He'd seen it before. The way people praised him for being articulate, as if that was surprising. The way store clerks watched him a little too closely. The way strangers tensed when he walked past at night. He'd learned to move through the world carefully, quietly, making himself small to avoid suspicion. And now even his kindness was being questioned. Meanwhile, the woman saw the comments too. She watched as her film, meant to highlight quiet goodness, became a battleground for cynicism. She saw the hateful messages directed at him. She saw people dissecting his posture, his clothes, his tone of voice, as if trying to prove he wasn't really kind. Guilt hit her like a wave. She hadn't meant to put him in this position. She'd wanted to honor the moment, not dissect it. She'd wanted to remind people that goodness exists, not to invite scrutiny. She spent a sleepless night drafting and deleting messages. How do you apologize for sharing something beautiful that turned painful? How do you fix something you didn't mean to break? Finally, she wrote a simple email. No excuses. No justifications. Just, "I saw what's happening online. I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to feel exposed or doubted. If you're open to it, I'd like to talk on your terms, your time. No cameras. No audience. Just us." She sent it to the company's general contact form, hoping it would find its way to him. 2 days passed. No reply. She assumed he'd ignored it. And honestly, she wouldn't have blamed him. But on the third morning, her phone buzzed. A short message: "A coffee? Tomorrow at 10, corner of 5th and Maple." Her hands shook as she typed back, "Yes, thank you." She didn't know what would happen when they met. She didn't know if he'd be angry, hurt, or just tired. But she knew one thing. She owed him the chance to tell his side, not as a character in her film, but as a real person, and maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to turn this mess back into something meaningful. Because the truth was, his act hadn't just helped her on that flight. It had sparked something in her. A reminder that real change doesn't come from grand gestures, but from ordinary people choosing kindness when it costs them something. Now, she just hoped she hadn't ruined that truth by trying to share it. The coffee shop was quiet that morning, just the soft hiss of the espresso machine. the clink of ceramic cups and the low murmur of two people catching up in the corner. Sunlight streamed through the front window, casting warm rectangles across the wooden tables. Outside, the city moved at its usual pace, cars honking, delivery bikes weaving through traffic, people rushing to work with paper bags and earbuds in. He arrived first. He chose a table near the back, away from the window, where he could see the door but not be seen from the street. He wore a plain hoodie and jeans, nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention. He ordered black coffee, no sugar, and sat with his hands wrapped around the mug, watching the steam curl into the air. His expression was calm, but inside he was bracing himself. He didn't know what to expect. Apologies could be sincere or performative. Regret could be real or just damage control. He'd learned to read people carefully. A few minutes later, she walked in. She looked different from the flight, less exhausted, more alert, but also more nervous. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on him. She hesitated for just a second, then walked over. "Hi," she said softly, setting her bag down. "Thanks for meeting me," he nodded. "Yeah, sit." She ordered a tea, then sat across from him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't hostile, just heavy, like both were weighing how much to say, how much to trust. Finally, she broke it. "I owe you an apology," she said, looking straight at him. "Not just for sharing the story, but for not thinking through what it might mean for you. I got so caught up in the message, the idea that kindness still exists, that I forgot you're a real person, not a symbol." He took a slow sip of coffee. "I get why you did it," he said after a pause. "I really do. The world could use more reminders like that. But I didn't ask," she said, "and that was wrong." He exhaled, shoulders relaxing just a little. Most people wouldn't have even thought to apologize. "I had to," she said. "Because what's happening online, it's not fair. People are twisting your act into something it wasn't. And I know," she stopped, choosing her words carefully. "I know it's not the first time someone's doubted your intentions just because of how you look." He looked down at his cup. Didn't say anything for a while. Then, "You ever notice how when a white guy does something kind, it's heartwarming? But when it's me, people ask, what's he really after? Like generosity has to come with a hidden agenda if it's coming from someone like me." She nodded slowly. "I've seen it, and I didn't protect you from it. That's on me." They sat in silence again, but this time it felt different. Less like tension, more like shared understanding. After a while, he leaned forward. "So what now? You pull the video?" She shook her head. "I thought about it. But then I read messages from teachers who showed it to their students, from nurses who said it got them through a tough shift, from parents who told their kids, be like that man. If I take it down, those moments disappear too." He frowned. "But the hate comments are loud," she finished. "But they're not the majority. And maybe the problem isn't the story. Maybe it's that we never talk about why people are so quick to doubt kindness, especially from certain people." He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," she said, voice steady now, "that instead of hiding your story, we could use it to start a real conversation. Not just look how nice he is, but why is it so hard for some people to believe he's nice?" He was quiet for a long time. Outside, a bus rumbled past. Inside, the barista laughed at something a customer said. Finally, he spoke. "Only if it's honest. No sugarcoating. No making me into some saint. I'm just a guy who gave up a seat. That's it. That's all I want to show," she said. "The truth. The messiness. The doubt, the hope. All of it." He studied her face, searching for any hint of agenda. But all he saw was sincerity, and maybe a little fear, like she knew how much was at stake. "All right," he said. "But on one condition. Name it. No interviews where you ask me how it feels to be a black hero. No staged photos. And if at any point I say stop, you stop. No questions asked. Deal," she said immediately. They shook on it, not dramatically, just a quick clasp of hands across the table. But in that moment, something shifted. This wasn't about a viral video anymore. It was about two people trying to turn a moment of unintended harm into something useful. Over the next few weeks, they met several times. Always in public, always casual. They talked about their lives, their fears, the things they wished people understood. He told her about growing up being told to smile more so he wouldn't look threatening. She shared how after her brother died, she'd stopped believing in small kindnesses, until strangers kept showing up with casseroles, cards, quiet presents. Slowly, a new idea took shape. Instead of a follow-up video defending him, they'd create a short documentary together, not just about that flight, but about the assumptions people carry. They'd interview psychologists about bias, talk to other people who'd been doubted for doing good, include clips of online comments, both kind and cruel, to show how the same act can be seen in wildly different ways depending on who's doing it. And at the center of it all would be one simple question. Why is kindness sometimes seen as suspicious? They filmed in his living room, in her editing studio, in parks and cafes. He spoke on camera only when he felt ready. She never pushed. When he stumbled over words, she let the silence sit. When he got emotional talking about being followed in stores as a teen, she didn't cut away. She let the camera hold the moment. The result wasn't polished. It wasn't slick, but it was real. When they released it, they called it, "Why Do We Doubt Goodness?" This time they were ready for the reaction. Yes, there were still critics. Some called it woke propaganda. Others said they were making everything about race. But something different happened too. People started sharing their own stories. A woman wrote, "I'm a nurse. Last week I helped an elderly man cross the street. A bystander filmed it and posted, 'Finally a good cop. I'm not a cop. I'm a black woman in scrubs. Why did they assume I was law enforcement just because I was helping?' A teacher commented, 'I showed this to my high school class. We had the most honest conversation about bias I've ever had with students. Thank you.' Even some of the original skeptics came around. One user who'd written, probably staged, later posted, 'Watch the new video. I was wrong, sorry.' The man didn't read every comment. He couldn't. But he did read enough to feel something shift. Not in the world, maybe, but in himself. For the first time, he didn't feel like he had to shrink his kindness to make others comfortable. He could just be. One evening, weeks after the release, he got a message from a stranger. It was a photo of a young boy, maybe 10 years old, holding a handmade sign that read, "Today I helped a girl pick up her books. No one filmed it. But I remembered your story." He stared at that photo for a long time. It wasn't fame. It wasn't praise. It was something quieter, deeper, proof that one small act, seen, questioned, defended, and ultimately understood, could plant a seed in someone else's heart, and that seed could grow. Back at the coffee shop where it all began, the two of them met one last time before the project wrapped. No cameras this time. Just two people who'd started as strangers, become reluctant collaborators, and ended up something like friends. "I still can't believe how far this went," she said. Stirring her tea. "Me neither," he said. "But I'm glad we didn't let the noise drown out the point." "What's the point then?" she asked with a small smile. He thought for a moment. "That kindness doesn't need to be perfect to matter. It just needs to be real," she nodded. "And maybe real kindness includes listening when you've hurt someone, even by accident." "Especially then," he said. They sat in comfortable silence as the afternoon light faded. Outside, the city kept moving. People hurried past, unaware of the conversation happening inside, a conversation about doubt, trust, and the courage it takes to believe in each other. And in that quiet corner of a coffee shop, two ordinary people proved that sometimes the most powerful stories aren't the ones that go viral, but the ones that change how we see each other. Months had passed since the documentary went live, and the noise around it had finally settled into something quieter, something more like conversation than chaos. The man had gone back to his routine, coding in the mornings, walking his dog in the evenings, grabbing coffee from the same corner shop where the barista now greeted him by name. Life felt normal again, but not the same. Something had shifted inside him, not in a loud, dramatic way, but like a river slowly carving a new path through stone. He carried himself differently now, not with pride, but with a quiet certainty that his kindness didn't need permission to exist. The woman, too, had returned to her work, but with a new focus. The success of their collaboration, measured not in views but in messages from teachers, counselors, and community leaders, had sparked an idea she couldn't shake. What if they didn't stop at one film? What if they built something that could keep this conversation going? She brought it up over lunch one afternoon, sitting on a bench in the park near her apartment. Autumn had arrived, and the trees were shedding golden leaves that crunched underfoot. She unwrapped her sandwich slowly, choosing her words with care. I've been thinking, she said, what if we turn this into something real? Not just videos, but a place, online and in person, where people can share stories, learn about bias, and practice kindness without performance? He raised an eyebrow. Like a nonprofit. More like a movement, she said. Small, local, human. We wouldn't be the faces of it, we'd just help build the space. Let other people step into the light. He was quiet for a while, watching a squirrel dart up a tree with a stolen acorn. You really think people want that? In this climate? I think they're starving for it, she said. Look at the messages we got. People aren't tired of kindness, they're tired of fake kindness. They want real connection, real accountability, real hope. He nodded slowly. Okay, but if we do this, it has to stay grounded. No corporate sponsors trying to slap our logo on a tote bag. No turning pain into profit. Agreed, she said. This isn't about us. It's about creating room for others to be seen. And so, quietly, without press releases or launch parties, they began. They started online, a simple website with a clean design. No flashy animations, just stories submitted by everyday people. A bus driver who stayed late to help a lost child. A teenager who stood up for a classmate being bullied. A grocery clerk who covered a stranger's bill when their card declined. Each story was verified, edited only for clarity, never for drama. Visitors could read them, share them, or submit their own. But they knew the internet wasn't enough. Real change happened face to face, so they reached out to schools, not with grand proposals but with humility. They offered to come speak, not as experts but as two people who'd stumbled into something bigger than themselves. They told the story of the flight, the backlash, the conversation over coffee, and the choice to turn pain into purpose. They didn't preach. They asked questions. When was the last time someone doubted your good intentions? When was the last time you doubted someone else's? Students leaned in. Teachers took notes. Principals invited them back. Then came community centers, libraries, youth groups. They set up kindness circles, small gatherings where people could talk about times they gave or received help and how it felt. Sometimes it was joyful. Sometimes it was hard. One night, an older man shared how he'd stopped helping people on the street after being accused of trying to look good for the cameras. A young woman spoke about how she'd stopped volunteering because people assumed she was doing it for college applications. In those rooms, something powerful happened. People realized they weren't alone in feeling misunderstood. The man often stayed quiet during these circles, listening more than speaking. But when he did talk, people listened. Not because he was famous, but because he spoke plainly without polish. I didn't give up that seat to be a hero, he once said. I did it because she looked like my sister did when she was pregnant, tired, scared, trying to hold it all together. And I knew how much a little space could mean. That honesty became their compass. As the project grew, they made a rule. No spotlight on themselves. They never appeared in promotional photos. They declined podcast interviews that wanted to tell their story. Instead, they amplified others. They featured a single dad who walked 3 miles every day to visit his son in the hospital. A retired teacher who tutored kids for free in her living room. A barista who remembered every regular's order and asked how their week was going. These weren't viral moments. They were life moments. And that was the point. One Saturday morning, they hosted their first in-person event at a local community center. A day of quiet generosity. No cameras. No social media check-ins, just people showing up to pack care kits for unhoused neighbors, write letters to isolated seniors, or plant trees in a neighborhood park. The man arrived early, helping set up tables and fill bins with socks, toiletries, and handwritten notes. He wore a plain t-shirt and work gloves, blending in with the volunteers. No one recognized him, not that it mattered. He wasn't there to be seen. He was there to do. Later, as he tied a ribbon around a care kit, a little boy, maybe 6 or 7, tugged on his sleeve. "Mister," the boy whispered, "my mom said you're the one who gave away your airplane seat." He knelt down to the boy's level. "Maybe," he said gently. "But that was just one day. What matters is what you do today." The boy held out a drawing, a stick figure man giving a seat to a pregnant woman, with a big sun in the corner and the words, "Be kind," in wobbly letters. "I made this for you," he said. The man took it, throat tight. "Thank you," he said. "I'll keep it forever." That night, he taped the drawing to his fridge right next to a photo of his dog and a grocery list. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Kindness ripples in ways you'll never see. Back at the office, they'd rented a small room above a bookstore with mismatched chairs and a coffee maker that always leaked. The woman was going through submissions. One caught her eye. It was from a high school student who'd been bullied for wearing secondhand clothes. A classmate had noticed, started sitting with her at lunch, and eventually organized a clothing drive for students in need. The student wrote, "I used to think kindness was weak. But after seeing your project, I realized it takes real courage to care when no one's watching." She printed the letter and pinned it to their idea board, next to sketches for workshops, notes from teachers, and a photo of their first kindness circle. They weren't changing the world overnight, but they were changing corners of it, and in those corners something beautiful was growing. One evening, as they packed up after a long day, the man paused in the doorway. "You ever think about how weird it is?" He asked. "What?" "That all this started because I gave up a seat. One tiny choice, and now, this," she smiled. "It wasn't just the seat. It was what you did after, the way you showed up even when it was hard, and the way you trusted me when I didn't deserve it." He shook his head. "We both showed up. That's the thing people miss. Kindness isn't a solo act. It's a chain. One person gives. Another receives. Another passes it on. We're just links in it." She looked around the room at the posters, the notes, the half-empty coffee cups, and felt a deep sense of peace. This wasn't fame. It wasn't fortune. It was something far more valuable, meaning, and it was built not on perfection but on honesty. Not on performance but on presence. As they locked up and walked out into the cool night air, the city hummed around them. Cars, voices, distant music. Somewhere a kid was helping a neighbor carry groceries. Somewhere a stranger was paying for someone's coffee. Somewhere a person was choosing kindness, even when no one would ever know, and that they both knew was enough. Years had passed since that flight, the one where a simple choice rippled outward in ways no one could have predicted. The man was older now, not in years alone, but in the quiet wisdom that comes from living through both kindness and suspicion, from giving without expectation and still being doubted, then choosing to give again anyway. He still worked in tech, though he'd cut back his hours to spend more time mentoring young people in coding clubs and community programs. His hair had a few more grays, his laugh a little deeper, but his eyes held the same calm steadiness they always had. The woman, too, had changed. Her hair was shorter now, her steps quicker, her voice more confident, not because she'd become famous, but because she'd learned to trust her own voice. The small nonprofit they'd started together had grown, not into a massive organization with offices in every city, but into something far more valuable, a trusted presence in neighborhoods across the country. They never chased scale, they chased sincerity, and somehow that was enough. Their work had taken root in schools, libraries, even a few rural towns where internet access was spotty, but the need for human connection was strong. They trained facilitators, teachers, retirees, teenagers to lead kindness circles using their simple guide. Listen without judgment, share without performance, act without waiting for applause. There were no metrics for success, no dashboards tracking impact. They measured it in letters, in hallway conversations, in the way a student would raise their hand and say, "I tried what you talked about." It worked. One spring morning, the man boarded a flight, not first class this time, but economy as he usually did. He'd learned to enjoy the closeness of it, the shared snacks, the whispered conversations, the way strangers became temporary companions at 35,000 feet. He was heading to a high school in Ohio where students had started their own quiet generosity club after watching the documentary in class. He wasn't there to speak as a hero. He was there to listen. As the plane taxied down the runway, he pulled out a worn notebook from his bag. Tucked inside was a letter he'd received a week earlier. It was handwritten on lined notebook paper, the ink slightly smudged, the handwriting careful but young. "Dear Sir, my mom showed me your story when I was scared to help someone. There was a new kid at school who got picked on because he dressed different. I wanted to say something, but I was afraid people would laugh at me too. Then I remembered you giving up your seat even though no one asked you to, so I sat with him at lunch. Just once, but then I kept doing it. Now we're friends. I don't know if you'll read this, but I wanted you to know your choice mattered. Not just to the pregnant lady on the plane, but to me and to him and maybe to others I haven't even met yet. Thank you for showing us that kindness doesn't need a reason. It just needs a start. Liam, age 12, he reread the letter for the third time, his thumb brushing the edge of the paper. He didn't cry. He wasn't that kind of person. But something warm settled in his chest, like sunlight through a window on a cold day. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the notebook. Outside, the clouds stretched endlessly, white and soft against the blue. The flight attendant came by with drinks and he ordered tea. As she handed it to him, she paused. "Wait," she said, squinting slightly. "Have I seen you before?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe, I fly this route sometimes." She shook her head. "No, I think my daughter showed me a video once, about someone giving up a seat." He didn't confirm or deny, just nodded and said, "Hope she's doing well." "She is," the attendant said, her voice softening. "She volunteers at a shelter now. Says she learned from stories like that." He thanked her and she moved on. He sipped his tea, watching the horizon. He thought about how strange it was that one moment, just a few seconds of decision on a crowded plane, could echo through time like this. Not because he was special, but because the act itself was ordinary. That was the whole point. Kindness wasn't reserved for saints or celebrities. It belonged to everyone. It lived in grocery lines, school hallways, bus stops, and yes, even in cramped airplane seats. When the plane landed, he collected his bag and walked slowly through the terminal. At the rental car counter, a young man fumbled with his license, clearly flustered. The clerk looked impatient. Without thinking, the man stepped forward. "Hey," he said gently, "I've got a little time. You want me to hold your bag while you sort that out?" The young man looked up, surprised, then relieved. "Yeah, thanks, it was a tiny thing. Barely worth mentioning." But as he walked away, he felt that same quiet warmth again. Later that afternoon, he stood in a high school auditorium filled with students. They weren't there because they had to be. They'd signed up. Some looked curious, others skeptical, a few bored. He didn't start with his story. Instead, he asked a question. "What's something small someone did for you that you still remember?" Hands went up slowly at first, then faster. "A lunch lady saved me a cookie when I forgot my lunch. My grandpa taught me how to fix a bike tire. A stranger helped me find my dog when he ran away." He listened to each one, nodding, never interrupting. Then he said, "Now, what's something small you've done that someone might still remember?" Silence. Then a girl in the back raised her hand. "I held the door for a woman carrying groceries. She smiled like she really needed it." "That's it," he said. "That's the whole thing. You don't need a camera. You don't need a crowd. You just need to notice someone and choose to care." After the talk, students lingered. Some asked questions. Others just wanted to shake his hand. One boy hung back until the room was almost empty. "Did you ever regret giving up that seat?" he asked. The man thought for a moment. "Not once. Even when people doubted me, I knew why I did it. And that was enough." The boy nodded like he was storing that answer for later. On the flight home, the man sat by the window again. This time, the seat beside him was empty. He pulled out his notebook and wrote a short reply to Liam's letter. Not to send, just to say it out loud to himself. "Dear Liam, thank you for sitting with your friend. That took more courage than most people realize. Keep noticing. Keep choosing kindness, even when it's quiet, even when no one sees. The world needs people like you. Someone who believes in you." He closed the notebook and leaned his head against the window. The plane climbed into the evening sky, stars beginning to flicker above the clouds. Down below, cities glowed like scattered embers. In one of them, a kid was walking home with a new friend. In another, a teacher was preparing a lesson on empathy. In another, a stranger was paying for someone's coffee. And in that moment, high above the earth, the man felt a deep, quiet peace, not because he'd changed the world, but because he'd played his small part in keeping it kind. He didn't need recognition. He didn't need a headline. All he needed was to know that the ripple continued. And as the plane hummed through the night carrying him home, he smiled just a little, knowing it did.